Right, Carlton King, the former Scotland Yard Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of Black Ops.
I was undercover for Special Branch in a jihadi organisation.
If you'd like to help Carlton keep producing the Black Spy podcast and receive episodes and information that's only available to Carlton's special Patreon agents, then you can donate as little as £3, €4 or $5 a month by signing up with Patreon. See the Black Spy podcast notes or Google Patreon Black Spy podcast and pledge your monthly amount. You can even win the opportunity to be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe for free.
My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy podcast, the show that shines a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security, armed governmental personal protection operations, and probably the most, geopolitics, the things around us, what happens, whether we know it or not, in our name. And today, I've got on, once again, my partner in crime. That's what she told me to say, my partner in crime. For the last two episodes. It's Firgas Esack. Firgas, how are you again?
How do you do? How are you? Like, I'm good, I'm good.
Excellent.
I'm hoping your listeners are loving this as much as I am, but you know, it's all good. It's all good.
Or as much as me, indeed. I'm loving it. Yeah. So listen.
Or as much as you, you know, or if anyone else has got any, you know, I am the one that asks the questions that we're all thinking but we don't dare ask. So if anyone else is listening and they've got those questions that they don't dare ask, like, you know where to post them. You can tweet them, you can Gmail them to Carlton, you can post them in the comments, anywhere.
Absolutely. Or to you, indeed, yeah? They can pass it to you, can't they?
They can get in touch with me. They can get in touch with me. But we read them, we'll answer them. You know.
Absolutely. So what have you got because of that? Have you got something special for me today?
I've got a curveball for you, right? So okay. I thought in my head, right? I thought, oh yeah, let's talk about refugees. Like, let's chat about refugees. We can talk about refugees, right? And then these last 2 days, there's been this story in the press, right, about this lady in waiting, Lady Susan Hussey.
All right, yeah.
And her race comments.
Yeah.
To this woman.
Yeah.
Ngozi Fulani. And this lady in waiting is Prince William's godmother. Mm-hmm. Now she has now today resigned because of these comments, right? But there's such a parity between what happens in this week in this situation with a certain chapter in your book.
Yep, true.
With a prime minister and a football player. Now, I don't know if you want to reveal that story, if you want to make people buy the book, but it struck me as remarkable. And I'm going to read the conversation that the media reported, you know, in a minute. But it struck me as remarkable that the narrative was so similar to something that you directly reported like 25 years ago.
Yeah, correct.
Right?
Correct.
So like, look, look, to preface this, this amazing woman, Ngozi Fulani, like, so she runs a domestic abuse charity. She was at Buckingham Palace for an event, and you know, let's not disrespect her. Lady Susan Hussey, the former Queen's lady in waiting and Prince William's godmother, met her at this event at Buckingham Palace that she'd been invited to, right? Mm-hmm. And she said to her, "Where are you from?" And the lady said, like, Ngozi Fulani. Let's call her Miss Fulani. Let's give her as much respect as well. Right.
Mhm.
She said Sister Space, which is the name of her charity.
Right, okay.
Then Lady Susan Hussey says, "No, where are you actually from?" And
Right.
she says, "We're based in Hackney."
Mhm.
And then Lady Susan Hussey says, "No, where in Africa are you from?" And she says, "I don't know, they didn't leave any records." And then Lady Susan Hussey says, "Well, you must know where you're from. I spent time in France. Where are you from?" And she says, "I'm from here in the UK." And then Lady Susan Hussey says, "No, but what nationality are you?" And she says, "I'm born here and I'm British." And Lady Susan Hussey says, "No, but where do you really come from? Where do your people come from?" And she says, "My people? What is this?" And then Lady Susan Hussey says, "Oh, I can see I'm going to have a challenge getting you to say where you're from. When did you first come here?" And she says, "Lady, I'm a British national. My parents came here in the 50s. Lady Susan Hussey says, "Oh, I knew we'd get there in the end, so you're Caribbean." And she says, "No, my lady, I'm of African heritage, Caribbean descent, and British nationality." And then this carries on, right? But what astounded me was how similar this is to that bit in your book, which you might want to narrate for your audience or you might not. But is this not shocking how similar this is to something that you described 20, 25 years ago?
Right. What I will say is this one. I'll let people read that in the book. And that was with a former prime minister who is a great guy, not saying anything about him, great fella, but showed the same type. And I got on well with him, and we spoke often about most things, many, many, many different things. And he orientated that insofar as, I'm not going to go deeply into it, insofar as Arsenal football team not playing an Englishman. And I basically said, look, there's 3 Englishmen on that team, yeah, and I articulated who the Englishmen were. And he basically said, no, they aren't Englishmen, those are West Indians. Now, we go deep into it in the book and you can look at it. But what's just surprised me, because you just read out this thing about Hussey, which I don't know very much about, and I think, and believe me, I've got to be very careful, because I think I've met her, right? Because when you said France, I think I've met her. And I'll tell you why. Okay, going back many, many, many years to 1984, and I'm in the Metropolitan Police Training College, okay? And certain people were coming to the college to speak to the new recruits, of which I was one. And they said, we've got people from, Buckingham Palace, from blah, 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 turning up. Here they are. This lady came to me. I didn't know what her name was, so it may not be Lady Hussey, but even if it isn't, it shows you a connection there. And she said to me, where are you from? So I said, I'm from a town up north. Yeah, and said my town, where I'm from, blah, blah, blah. She said, no, where are you actually from? I said, from the town up north, blah, 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 blah. Okay, where were you born? And I said, the town up north. So I'd said it 3 times. So she then said, right, well, what I mean is, she said, I spent a lot of time in France, and there's France, and there's Britain. And she used the word France. There's France, and there's Britain, and they're different places. I said, yeah, I'm pretty much familiar that France and Britain are different places. I said, so what I'm trying to find out is, where are you from? And I said, I'm from the place up north. Right? She said, right. Okay, then where are your parents from? And I was feeling a little bit bloody minded. So I said, from the place up north. Right? Same place. She said, but where are they really from? right? And I said, what are you trying to say? I've basically explained to you where I'm from, and you're trying to say something else. Now, at that time, I had studied the basically the African diaspora around the world. And I'd studied that in an American university, and I was going to the American university for a degree in this. And because I was working for the American, I was on the GI Bill. If you're American, you'll understand what it is. Basically, they pay for your education, blah, blah, blah. Now, the problem was that I actually was being paid by the Germans. So I got 3/4 of the way through the course, and then they said, listen, you can't finish the course because to be on the GI Bill, you've got to be being paid by us and therefore be on our pay scale rather than the German pay scale, which is a better pay scale with more holidays, etc., etc., etc. So they said, you cannot do this under the GI Bill. So I'd already done 3/4 of the course. I knew what I was talking about, and I'd studied a lot about the African diaspora. So I said, are you aware that people of African heritage have been in the United Kingdom, in England to be precise, since around 2,000 years, since the Roman times? And I said to her, there's an emperor called Emperor Severus. He came to Britain with Legianus Africanus, and these legions were black, as he was black, a black emperor of Rome. And these people were at Hadrian's Wall, and then they moved forward to battle against the Picts, the Scots, and knock them back away from Hadrian's Wall. The Emperor Severus died and was buried in York for a while, and then they took him back to Rome. And his African legions controlled that area of Hadrian's Wall, Carlisle, and around all that area for many, many, many years, and married local women or just had babies with local women, etc., etc., etc. So I said, frankly, if not before, at that time, there were black Romans who were legionnaires, who were high-ranking members of the society, because, of course, that was the emperor and he had other blacks with him. There were those who were lower down and who were potentially enslaved Romans, as loads of other people were enslaved. And there were those in the middle who were merchants, whatever, who lived in Britain and worked in Britain. Frankly, before the Angles and Saxons, indeed 3 centuries before the Angles and Saxons, which we say are our progenitor, or our English progenitors. So I said, so what are you trying to say? So what happens is, as we go through it though, sometimes, and there's been at least 5 major influxes of blacks in the Moorish times, example, talking about 1600s now. I don't know if you know that southern, well, let's say Iberia and up to southern France was conquered by the Moors, who were, again, black African people, right? Because Moor meant black, and that's what the people call them. Moor meant black. In Britain, we call them blackamoors, because Moor doesn't mean black in the English language, but it does in most European languages like Moor and Kopf, Moor, whatever. It means black, black head, black whatever. So these guys were there, married with the locals, and for 700 years they ran Spain and Portugal, etc., into Italy and southern France. I said, so these folk have been knocking around and moving around into Britain, and quite a number of them came to Britain. So Queen Elizabeth I, and I said to her, look up the proclamation in 1601, said there's too many blackamoors here, get rid of them, and she gave the job to a Dutchman to get rid of the blacks who were in Britain. He didn't get rid of them, they still stayed. But what happens is, obviously, they intermingle with the locals, and before you know it, they lighten out, as are members of my family. Some of them are very, very light. Many people would say they were white. Right. So this is what happens in the society, but the heritage is there in the individuals. So that's why I'm kind of animated. And I explained this to her, and she didn't want to know. She walked off. Now, the question is that the same woman? I don't know. But what you're finding is we've got this kind of synonymous element of you can't be English, definitely, and black. And it's a nonsense, because historically it's not the case. That is what I'd like for listeners to understand. And it doesn't mean that the individual putting this forward is necessarily racist. What it means is the individual is ill-educated. And I provided the same history to the Prime Minister who we're talking about, so he could understand. And I think it's the problem. It's not difficult to understand, really, because we turn around and we say North Africa is much lighter than what it used to be because Arab people came in, not even Arab people, people from far enough east came in and mixed, because Arab people are generally mixed-race people anyhow, and mixed with the people, and so they're lighter skinned. And if you want to go further than that, you can go all the way to Australia and see what we see as an Australian today. If you say an Australian, we have a picture of him, and he's generally, he or she is a white person. That's our picture of them because of the immigration into that land. We have the same picture of Canada. We have the same picture of the United States. So why is it so difficult to have a picture of a person who is not white, but English and British?
Okay, well, yes, that is a really interesting point, and that is why I feel like there is a huge synergy with the original conversation that I was going to have with you about refugees, right? So if Great Britain, if the UK is a blended state, and if we accept all of that, and if we know all of that, right? Okay, let's just think first of all about the okay, so I'm going by the UN definitions, right? Okay, so there's refugees, there's asylum seekers, there's migrants, there's hunger refugees, there's war refugees, or whatever, right? It's all different. I mean, like, I think in my mind, a refugee or an asylum seeker sort of has no choice, but a migrant has a choice about where they go, right? There are 27 million refugees according to the UN. The UK took 1,600 in 2021, and they took 3,000 the year before, right? Now, we know where these refugees are coming from. We know what the situation is. They're getting into boats, they're crossing the channel, they're coming here. They're living in a shanty town in on the coast. As you've just said, the Great Britain is a blended culture. We're a blended society. Mm-hmm. Going back to, I mean, my 8-year-old's learning about the Romans in school at the moment. Going back to exactly what you've just said.
Yeah.
Why are we not just accepting these people and building our culture further, right? Mm-hmm. Now, we'll go into this in more detail, obviously, and we'll talk about all of this. But Priti Patel's own family fled from Ghana, right? So she herself is a child of a refugee. I mean, Rishi Sunak. Well, I mean, he's an Indian family, but his
Tanzania,
parents, migrated through Africa.
From Tanzania.
Yeah, right? Exactly. So why did Boris and his cronies create this problem, create this barrier for refugees when? Right.
Let me jump in, because this is number one, politicians, and I'm not the greatest fan thereof. Some are nice, but generally the problem with politicians are they will hang their grandmother to get to the top. Okay, that's just the way it is, right? So they feel the temperature of what they think is about, and then what they do is they say, this is how I'm going to get on. I'm going to say, these people are nasty refugees, they're not real refugees, etc., 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 and that should get me up the greasy pole, right? So it doesn't matter where they come from, because the reality is, in the United Kingdom, that class is probably about the most important thing that you can have. So money and class outstrip everything else. So you have these people whose heritage clearly is from elsewhere, because we've explained it, where they've come from to move into to Britain, but they hold nothing with that, because they know that what today sells is the fear of immigration. So let's jump into that fear of immigration. So let's get some definitions right.
Let's also just rewind that, like, that fear of immigration that was Theresa May's making, wasn't it? You know, that she
before then. Let's be realistic. It's been before then. Listen, I'm a guy who's born like in the mid-50s and brought up then in the mid-50s, only black person in my area, saw the National Front, etc., etc., etc. So I know what it's like. It's not new. It's old. It's been around for a long time. This is why I actually got involved in looking for the history, even before I worked for the American, because I wanted to understand what is the heritage of the United Kingdom. And this is why I say to everybody, don't take my word for it. Go to the British Museum. See the proclamation from Queen Elizabeth I. It sits in there. Queen Elizabeth I, 1601. It sits in there. Too many blacks. Go Hansards. You can read Hansards. 1778. Okay. An MP speaks out. You know, Hansards is where they write everything that an MP says in Parliament. And he says there's too many blacks here. There's not a town, a village, or a hamlet where you can't go without seeing them knocking about. Unfortunately, the lower order of woman. And as I just said to you before, class is everything. The lower order of woman seems to like them between their loin or something like that. He says, I'm relatively paraphrasing it. And there's pickaninnies being bought all over the place. He says, we need to get rid of these folk, right? Bosh. That's what he said. 1778. And the reason for that was that in 1776, the American War of Independence, as they named it, when we started losing that war, the Peninsular War, the general in charge basically said, those who fight for me who are presently enslaved, most blacks but not all, who are presently enslaved will be freed and will bring you to Britain, right, if we lose the war, which of course they had no intention on losing the war. They lost the Peninsular War, and what happened was, the War of Independence, and what happened was that they put these people in Canada, right? A black woman said, no, because the land that they gave them was rubbish. They said, you promised us Britain. So in the end, give them their due. They said, fair enough. And the Royal Navy put several ships on and brought many of these blacks who had fought in the war to Britain. Now, they were meant to get their war pensions because they'd fought on the side of the British forces. They didn't provide them with their war pensions. So then we had the whole problem of poor blacks. And particularly in the East End, so frankly, a lot of these guys in the East End have probably got some black heritage in them, particularly in the East End, you had it there. And if you look at Hogarth's...
So let's just sorry, I'm just going to pause. Let's just finish one bit.
Hogarth...
I was going to say, it's like, let's just think about why they didn't get them as well. Why did they didn't?
Yeah, okay. But this is what happens. Hogarth's etchings, Hogarth does a lot of, he's a satirist, so to satire the government, he did a lot of etchings with poor black beggar Bob and various other people who were there that he had on these etchings to say they should be getting what they were promised. So then came out a thing called the Poor Black Relief. Okay, and this is what this guy was referring to. Because in the Poor Black Relief, they started to pay these black folk their pensions. And they were in Cardiff and in London and generally Bristol, generally the cities with ports. That's where these guys were. Generally guys, but obviously some women as well. And so that was happening, but then they decided, you know what, let's try and get rid of them. So they bought Sierra Leone in West Africa from the local power players in the region, and they asked people to come to Sierra Leone, right? Come to Sierra Leone and go back to Africa. That's what they were saying. Some black people did with their white wives, because generally they were married to white people, with their white wives. But when they heard that they were all dying out in Sierra Leone because of, they'd no longer any resistance, particularly the white wives, no longer any resistance to some of the dengue fever and stuff like that. A lot of people said, nah, I'm staying where I am. So that, again, is another wave of a lot of black people in Britain. And then you compare the 1830s and 1840s was another wave. So there's been many, many waves of blacks coming into Britain. And basically what happens is they marry white British women, right? And then within, 50, 70 years, they are, maybe all you see is a little bit of curly or wavy hair and dark eyes and bits and baps like that. But they're not necessarily that black. So when you hear folks say, oh, in the 1940s and 40s we had no black people, it's nonsense. They were there, just they looked maybe a bit different. And then, of course, came the First World Wars. A lot of blacks came through again because they're fighting on the side of the British forces because it was a British Empire. And then just before the Windrush, the blacks were fighting on behalf of Britain in the Second World War. And this is one bit out I will say. The Windrush, when it arrives in 1948 at Tilbury Docks, the BBC reporter says to the guys he's speaking to, he said, "You're all ex-servicemen, aren't you?" So it isn't the first time they've been to Britain. They're actually shipping them back to Jamaica and the Caribbean. But because there was no work there, and because Enoch Powell needed people to work in Britain, he put forward a system saying those black guys could come back to Britain to find work in Britain to help after the war. But they had fought in the war. So this is what people misunderstand. These guys had not just turned up. Half of them in the RAF was the biggest, then second biggest were Jamaicans, actually, after British people in the RAF. Many were in the Royal Navy, or they were in the Merchant Navy, like my old man was, throughout the war, which had some of the highest losses in the war because they were being torpedoed by German submarines. And then some were in the army, and the army lot generally were fighting in Japan with British forces, or in Africa with British forces. So what you found was these were not new people to Britain. But we have not been told that history.
No, but also, obviously, this, to circle back to Lady Susan Hussey, like when she was saying, to this woman, to this amazing woman, she when she was saying, "Oh, you're from the Caribbean," she was obviously presuming that she was a Windrush generation. Absolutely, because Windrush talks only about people, and it really bugs me, about people coming after the Second World War to help build Britain. No, the first, and indeed, if I can find the BBC report, I will play it on the end of this podcast, because he actually says, "You're all ex-servicemen, aren't you?" That's what he actually says. Makes it very, very clear that they were fighting in the war, not that they've just turned up afterwards. Right? So, and by the way, the Windrush was an ex-German troop carrier, which is why they're on that ship anyway, and they're ex-British troops being sent back to the Caribbean after fighting for Britain. Right? That's the history of the Windrush. So that's that. Now, the other bit that you're talking about is refugees. Okay, so okay, all right. So look. Okay, let's flip this on its head. Let's flip this to now. Okay, so let's see. It was in April, wasn't it? So they did the Borders Act, the 2022 Borders Act. Said that essentially the problem was that it was illegal to lodge an asylum claim unless you're in the UK. Right. Or
to give them the due properly. Let's give them the due properly. Or you showed yourself at a British embassy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And basically said, "I'm seeking asylum." Okay. Yeah. Now, what you've got to realise is you've got to get into the embassy in the first place, because the embassies are obviously in foreign countries. So you've got to get into the embassy in the first place. But yes, correct.
And also you've got to know where it is.
Correct.
And
if the government's trying to bump you off or whatever, the soldiers or the police who basically control the embassy outside of it, because if you've ever been abroad and you go to an embassy, there's always police and soldiers from the force of the country in which they're in, and you might not get to the embassy in the first place because you may be stopped. Yeah. So that's the other side to that.
So when we always spar about the media, versus the government and the law and all the rest of it, right? In the case of those refugees crossing the channel, boat after boat after boat, some are successful, some that end in tragedy, some end in, horrific tragedy, right? Nobody willingly puts their children in an inflatable dinghy and puts them out in a forced gale and sends them across the channel, right? You know, but yet.
Can I be precise?
But yeah,
can I be precise?
To this point, right? So all I'm saying is, all I am saying is, from the media side, the media in this situation, in this case, you know, I know where we've sparred about, you know, the fact that, you know, maybe the media have got it wrong and all the rest of it, but in this case, the media have been incredibly sympathetic. You know, the media are hugely on the side of those refugees. They report every tragedy. They you know, they highlight all of that. You know, the families who are taking on those refugees into their family, or whatever, are heroes. The food banks.
Can I be precise? Can I be precise and come back to you on the media? Because I want to hear your media perspective. Because let me do two things first.
All I'm saying is, you know, the media for once is saying is saying the opposite of what the government is saying. You know, it's like you know what I mean, it's like it's like the Boris created this situation. You know, why can't do you know what I mean? It's like the media is saying, like, you know, like, come on, let's like, why
I'm going to disagree with you again, Fergus. This is what I love about us. We disagree. No, let me disagree. Let me say first, let's get the criteria, because I know there's people listening and then they say, oh, that's not right. Right, so let's get it absolutely right. So you are an asylum seeker until you're proved to be a refugee. Right, that's the first thing. So as an asylum seeker, right, so you're coming across without any papers, and the way how I know this, just to make it very clear to everybody, in the special branch, okay, Scotland Yard special branch, one of the sections we had dealt with naturalisation, so naturalising people, and one of the duties of the special branch was to work on what we called P Squad, which was ports. So we were at the section of ports, and we controlled those ports from the perspective of looking for undesirables, terrorists, spies, etc., who were trying to come into the United Kingdom. So I've got a great understanding of this. Right. So an asylum seeker, many people seek asylum, is somebody who says, I've been badly done to in my country, I can't stay there for whatever reason, it's been a war, or I'm being perceived as being against my country and I'll be killed if I'm there, etc., etc., etc. Right. Then you ask for asylum, and then if you get asylum, you then become a refugee and you get either remain to relieve, which is right to remain, which is generally for about 5 years, or an indefinite right to remain, which is for forever. Right, so you get that. Now, as an asylum seeker, this is what we need to understand and what the media doesn't do, you cannot work. You're not allowed to work. When you come in as an asylum seeker, they say you cannot work until your case is proven that you are a refugee. And that can take years. Now, and this is what I'm going to say about your point you've made. Somebody coming from the Ukraine, however, right, can work straight away. They changed the laws to allow a Ukrainian to come in and can work from the day they arrive in the United Kingdom. They do not need to stay in an asylum hostel or be tagged. They can live outside in the community with everybody. People can put them up as they will. From day one, they can receive Social Security. An asylum seeker does not receive Social Security. An asylum seeker gets a very small pittance to allow them to live in generally housing which is being put forward by the government, which is often cramped and a multi-system housing. It's not a house for themselves, none of that nonsense that you hear, right? And this is what the media doesn't do enough of. Let me also go further back from that. The vast majority of people seeking asylum, refugees, or just economic migrants do not come to Europe. Right, let's get this absolutely clear. It's about, if you figure it out, it's about 2%. The vast majority of people who are asylum seekers, who are refugees, who are migrants, go to the closest country next to them. So, example, South Africa has millions. Kenya has millions. Turkey has millions. The Lebanon has millions. If you go down,
and it's funny because I wanted to find, I actually, this was something that I wanted to find some narrative about. I wanted to actually find some case studies about, because I think this is interesting, you know, like you know, my own parents, you know, migrated to Britain from South Africa in 1972. You know, my dad was fleeing Robben Island, but you know, that's another story. But all I'm saying is, when I was a kid, I used to say to my parents, like, you know, I'd say, like, Mum, why did you come to Britain? It's rubbish. You know, and
what did your mother say? What did she say?
And they would say, oh well, because my mum would say, well, because your dad had work, you know, contacts here, and because we had friends here, and you know, da da da. And I said, I remember age about 5 saying, where else could you have gone? And Mum said, well, Australia or New Zealand or maybe America or whatever. And I'd be like freezing cold and going like, why did you not go to Australia? Come on. But it's like those, there's a huge, you know, what I think, again, is underrepresented on both sides, to be fair, is the purpose for those people making those crossings to the UK. You know, it's because they've got a great uncle there, or because they've got a, you know, heritage there, or because, to go back to your earlier point, you know, they feel connected to Britain.
They were part of the empire.
Yeah.
They were part, generally, I mean, you would be perceived as a white South African, would you not?
Me, yeah, but
you would have been perceived that way.
But saying that, you know, like you said about you know, genetics and heritage and all the rest of it, like, you know, I mean, my brother, if you looked at my brother, and bear in mind we're 10 months apart, right? If you looked at my brother, you'd think he was a black person.
Exactly, and that's the point I'm making. Do you hear me? You hear me use the word perceived?
Yeah. Because
this is what the problem was in South Africa. If you were, frankly, a proper Afrikaner, right, from the proper old Boer stock, the vast majority of them married in the original times in the Cape of Good Hope, when they first went there in the 1630s, 1640s. They married local people, right? So in their stock were mixed race. But of course, once you get to Dr. Verwoerd and his apartheid, you now have to change that around and say, oh, well, these are white and these whatever. And this is the problem you get. This is a nonsense of race, because these guys are so intermixed, and gals are so intermixed in reality. But of course, they didn't want to be intermixed. So that's why you've got these coloureds, those who were basically Afrikaners, but who still showed the colour, as opposed to those who are Afrikaners who didn't. And this is where you've got your problem. So that's why I say perceived. Now, the problem is that the perceived colour aids you. And this is the thing with the Ukrainian. And this is one of the things that has disgusted me. You know, I don't say much about race on the programme, but this is one of the things that has disgusted me. Right in the beginning of the Ukrainian situation, there were many reporters, not just white, black and white, and whatever other colours in between, who I saw crying because of what was happening in the Ukraine. Clive Mary comes to mind. The guy was crying, saying, oh, this is outrageous, what's going on? Your kid's dying. I've seen that fella in a field of thousands of babies who happen to be black in Somalia dying because they've no food, and not a tear in his eye. Right? So this is what you get. There was an American guy on there, one of the anchors, top guy, who turned around and said, you know, hey, listen, we have to understand in America that these are not your general refugees. These are like us. These are, you know, educated European people. These are like us. This is, you know, this should not be happening to people like us. Right. The first question I have, so the 18% of the US, or is it 17% now or 14% now, I don't know, that are black, are they not Americans? The other 25% are Hispanics, are they not Americans? The 8% who are what they would call Asian, what they really mean is Chinese heritage type individuals, are they not Americans? Or Americans only people who are what they call in America WASP? white Anglo-Saxons, right, as they perceive it. Right. So this is what I'm saying. So the Ukraine situation has skewed it. That's why it skewed the figures that we've got people who are refugees in Britain as well, because before the Ukraine, we had very, very few refugees in Britain in comparison to other countries. You only need to look at Germany, which, was taking literally 500,000 refugees a year.
The former Yugoslavian war. I mean,
Correct. Sweden took many, many people from the former Yugoslavian war. Loads of people from that. You had France, who's taken many, many people from many wars. Don't get me wrong, half the wars they started, but they've still taken people in from them. And of course, when you look at this, when you look at them, because we talk about the wars as devastating, we talk about all the war crimes that the Russians are doing. Let's be realistic, shall we, about this. I fought 20 years practically in wars that we started in Afghanistan and Iraq, right? The first thing we did in that Iraq war is American power, of course, is what the Americans call shock and awe, right? They basically obliterated every power station, everything you can think about, they destroyed it, right? So when you got there, the people had no electricity, no heating, no this, no that, none of the other, and hundreds of thousands died. Hundreds of thousands. I hear no clamour at that time, let's put these refugees up, which we're in a war that's involved in. I actually used to come back from that place, take into account I was going throughout the whole of the conflict from Afghanistan and Iraq. We were losing people in that conflict, soldiers, sailors, airmen and women, right? We were, not so many sailors, but airmen and women. We were losing people in the conflict, right? And nobody gave a monkey's uncle about the conflict. You'd come back to Britain, nobody cared. Now, the reason why we didn't lose more is because the medical care was so good. So yes, we got people with arms, legs missing, etc., but they didn't die. So we got people who died and those who didn't. We weren't even giving them proper funerals. It was only that some of the Royal British Legion people said we shouldn't be allowing our guys and gals to come back like this to no proper ceremony. So they put the ceremonies on for Afghanistan and Iraq. The government didn't want it to happen because they didn't want people to know the losses. Right? So
but also,
that's what we were involved in.
Even if you go back to like World War II, right? I mean, people always celebrate the moment that the Germans surrendered at World War II, but that's actually not when the war ended. I mean, it carried on.
Absolutely right.
In Russia and whatever for like probably another 2 years, right?
Yeah, I mean, people were being killed thereafter. Absolutely right. So the Germans put the figure at something like 800,000 people lost their lives after it. Retribution, etc. That's the German figure. I can't substantiate, but that's the figure. And I'm not saying it isn't the case. Retribution, stuff that went on. And in that war, we lost 450,000 people, hell of a lot of people. But the Soviet, right, lost 28 million people. I mean, this is an incredible figure. The Chinese lost 30 million people in that war. So when we are not, this is refugees moving between countries because wars happen. That's what goes on. And since the Second World War, the highest death in any war since the Second War, taking into account your Vietnam, taking into account Pol Pot's aspect, which was obviously a result of Vietnam and Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, the highest losses though are in Congo in the 1990s. 5.5 million people dead in the Second Congolese War. But of course, nobody was clamoring saying, let's all bring these Congolese folk over and let's bring them up and put houses up for them. So what I'm saying is, and I know that sounds like I'm being negative, but I'm being realistic. These are the facts. We have been allowing and aiding Saudi Arabia to blow up folk in the Yemen. I've been many times over there in our work. So what I'm saying is that we're involved ourselves in wars in many places, but we're not clamoring to bring the people to Britain. Even imagine it, Gurkhas who fought in every conflict which we've been having since probably about 1710, found it very, very hard to come to Britain. And they're serving soldiers.
Yeah. Okay. So all right. I'm going to be like girly and flippant here, and apologies to your listeners. Apologies, because this is a hugely serious thing. But like, a thing that always comes into my head, in a really flippant way, because when you have to just think, like, come on, why is this such a big deal, right? Why is this a problem? Okay, there's a 90s teen movie called Clueless, which I don't expect you to have ever watched, but but when I was a kid, like, this was a great film, right? Okay, it's got Alicia Silverstone in it, and she basically plays this LA sort of brat, and she there's a scene in it which sticks in my mind where she has to talk. She's been asked to do a debate about refugees coming into the US, and because she's like this LA brat, she has this story about I was organising this garden party, and I'd invited all these people, and some of them didn't RSVP, but they came anyway. But actually, we sorted it all out because I got the caterers to just extra cater, and then actually it was a better party. And then she rounds it up by saying, and by the way, on the Statue of Liberty, it does not say RSVP. And that's like the sort of film, right?
It's good. I can see that.
But you see what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
If Great Britain, as you said at the start of this conversation, is built on our multicultural heritage, and going back to Julius Caesar, and if this is the whole point, why are the politicians creating so many barriers to let people in? Why can you not? Why can they not provide safe passage?
You can't take everybody. Number one is you can't take everybody. Let's be clear. You can't take everybody.
Why should hundreds of people be dying?
True. I'm absolutely. I'm just going to say you can't take everybody. So I accept that, because that's the first thing that people listening to this are going to say. Oh, they want you to bring everybody in. You can't, and that's realistic. But the sins of the fathers, aren't they?
Surely seeking asylum is a right.
It is, absolutely, and part of the British system requested for by Sir Winston Churchill. Yeah,
and surely punishing victims of dictatorships, or punishing people for poverty, that goes against what Great Britain stands for as well, doesn't it?
This question we will answer next week. So we'll see you again next week.
Take care.
Arrivals at Tilbury. The Empire Windrush brings to Britain 500 Jamaicans. Many are ex-servicemen who know England. They serve this country well. In Jamaica, they couldn't find work. Discouraged but full of hope, they sailed for Britain. Citizens of the British Empire coming to the mother country with good intent. Prodded by public opinion, the Colonial Office gives them a more cordial reception than was at first envisaged. Many are to be found jobs. Our reporter asks them what they want to do.
Now, why have you come to England? To seek a job. And what sort of job do you want? Any type, so long as I get a good pay.
Some will go into industry, others intend to rejoin the services.
Now, you're an ex-Air Force, aren't you?
Yes.
Are you going back into the Air Force again?
Yes.
Did you know if you'll be accepted?
I think so.
Some plan to return to Jamaica when conditions improve.
I'd like to ask you, please, are you a single man?
I am a single man. Only my mother that is depending on me. And I'm also an ex-serviceman.
You're ex-service, RAF, are you?
RAF. I took a course in Scotland in case making, and I'm desirous of going back there to see if I can further, because I like it very much, and I'm trying to help myself and also help my mom.
Their spokesman sings his thanks to Britain.
Now, may I ask you your name?
Lord Kitchener.
Lord Kitchener. Now, I'm told that you are really the king of calypso singers. Is that right?
Yes, that's
Well, now, will you
true.
sing for us?
Right now.
Yes.
London is the place for me. London is the place for me. London, this lovely city. You can go to France or America, India, Asia or Australia, but you must come back to London City. Well, believe me, I am speaking broad-mindedly. I am glad to know my mother country. I've been traveling to countries years ago, but this is the place I wanted to know. London, that's the place for me. To live in London, you are really comfortable, because the English people are very much sociable. They take you here and they take you there, and they make you feel like a millionaire. So London, that's the place for me. At nights, when you have nothing to do, you can take a walk down Shaftesbury Avenue. There you would laugh and talk and enjoy the breeze and admire the beautiful scenery of London. That's the place for me. Yes, I cannot complain of the time I have spent. I mean, my life in London is really magnificent. I have every comfort and every sport, and my residence is at Hampton Court. So London, that's the place for me.
If you'd like to help Carlton keep producing the Black Spy podcast and receive episodes and information that's only available to Carlton's special Patreon agents, then you can donate as little as £3, €4 or $5 a month by signing up with Patreon. See the Black Spy podcast notes or Google Patreon Black Spy podcast and pledge your monthly amount. You can even win the opportunity to be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe for free.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
More than a quarter of a century, I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.